64 years ago, a 6-year-old girl named Ella Brooks vanished from her front yard in Bloomington, Indiana, on a quiet autumn afternoon, leaving behind only a pink ribbon lying in the grass as the sole trace. Police believed she had been abducted by a silver-haired woman driving a light blue Ford Fairlane, but no body was ever found. There were no eyewitnesses and very few leads to follow. The investigation eventually went cold. Yet, through all those long years, Ella's older brother never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile belief that his little sister was still alive somewhere. Then one day, when state police reopened the old file and uncovered a piece of evidence that had been forgotten for more than 50 years, everything changed. A discovery that would shock the entire nation and turn the case completely upside down. Before we dive into this strange and haunting story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love cold cases that get solved after decades, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Autumn 1961, Bloomington, a small university town in Indiana, still moved at the slow, orderly pace of 1960s America. In the mornings, church bells echoed through quiet streets, while rows of maple trees dropped bright red leaves onto the sidewalks. The Brooks family lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, where white picket fences stood perfectly straight, and people still left their doors unlocked when they went out. Richard Brooks, an electrical engineer at the local utility company, left the house at 7:15 every morning, as always. His wife Margaret, a second-grade teacher at Monroe County Elementary, made breakfast for the kids and neatly folded her embroidered napkin back into the drawer. Their older son, 13-year-old Thomas, was already developing the quiet demeanor of a teenager who preferred books to conversation. And then there was 6-year-old Ella, the brightest joy in the house, a blonde little girl who loved drawing with sidewalk chalk and giving names to every flower in the backyard. That afternoon the sky was clear, sunlight slanting across the low rooftops. Margaret was hanging laundry in the yard, Thomas was doing homework by the living room window, and Ella was crouched in front of the gate, holding a piece of colored chalk, drawing a chain of connected circles that looked like flowers. Early in the afternoon, a strange car drove slowly down the street, its engine almost silent. The driver was a woman with silver hair, wearing large sunglasses. Her face was hard to make out behind the windshield. Thomas glanced up once, and then looked back down, thinking it was just someone lost, and looking for directions. Margaret didn't notice. A gentle breeze was moving the bedsheet on the line and blocking her view of the gate. When she turned back around, the car had already turned the corner, and Ella was gone. Her little bicycle was tipped against the fence, chalk lay scattered on the ground, and the gate stood wide open. At first, Margaret thought she had run to a neighbor's house. She called Ella's name up and down the street, but no one answered. Thomas dropped his books and came outside. The two of them searched the yard, the backyard, the empty lot next door, then across the street. When they found no sign of Ella, they ran along the block knocking on every door. Neighbors joined the search. Some checked sheds, some looked in backyards, a few rode bikes down to the nearby market. The afternoon light faded. A cool autumn breeze moved through the trees. As darkness stretched across the lawn, Margaret came back to the house, pale and speechless. Richard got home around 5:30. The moment he stepped through the door, he saw the street full of people and his son crying on the front steps. He ran outside and heard his wife repeating the same sentence over and over, "She's gone." After a few seconds of absolute silence, Richard went inside, picked up the phone, dialed the police, and reported in a hoarse voice that his 6-year-old daughter had disappeared from their front yard on Maple Street, and no one had seen her since that afternoon. The moment Richard hung up, the first police siren could already be heard echoing from the end of the street. The red lights of the lead patrol car swept along the maple trees still wet with dew, reflecting off the damp pavement. Lieutenant Harold Crane, commander of the Bloomington Police Department's Rapid Response Team, stepped out of the car with 2 younger officers. He wore a heavy coat and carried a black briefcase. His polished leather shoes were muddy after just a few steps. The air around the house was thick with silence. Only a few neighbors stood behind their fences, faces showing both curiosity and fear. Crane approached Richard, shook his cold, trembling hand, then walked straight to the front yard. Floodlights illuminated a small patch of ground where the child's bicycle lay on its side. Colored chalk scattered around, and a pink ribbon lay in the grass. The wooden gate stood ajar, its hinges creaking faintly in the wind. Crane crouched down, examined the damp soil, and saw small shoe prints mixed with narrow tire tracks leading toward the street. He signaled the two officers to string up police tape, cordon off the scene, and set up a temporary work area. Margaret Brooks was slumped on the front steps, clutching her daughter's piece of chalk, her face white and eyes empty. Thomas stood nearby, silent, occasionally glancing at the bicycle as if hoping something would appear. Crane nodded to the medic to check on the mother, then turned to Richard. "Walk me around the yard." The two men moved slowly along the brick path, stopping where Ella usually drew with chalk. Her little cup of water still sat untouched beside it. There were no signs of a struggle. Everything was in its place. On the porch, a child's knit sweater hung loosely, its sleeves swaying slightly in the breeze. Crane stared for a long moment, then told an officer, "Photograph the whole scene. Number every item, every footprint." When the second support vehicle's lights swept in, he followed the fence line and stopped at the tire tracks near the gate. The soil was damp but the impressions shallow. The vehicle had stopped only briefly before leaving. He measured the distance between the tracks, jotted notes in his notebook, and marked the spot with red chalk. Then Crane stepped back, taking in the entire house. The flashing lights reflected in the windows like the ragged breathing of the night. He set up a field desk on the lawn, ordered headquarters to send additional units, and the K-9 team. Over the radio came the dispatcher's crackling voice, "K-9 unit en route, ETA 20 minutes. Crane opened his notebook and wrote the details: location, time, weather conditions, evidence collected, witnesses identified. On the last line he paused, drew a red line underneath, and wrote briefly, "Missing child, probable abduction." Crane closed the notebook and looked around the yard once more. Everything was oppressively quiet, only the wind threading through the fence and the flashing lights bouncing off the windows. He exhaled slowly, already sensing this was no ordinary case of a child wandering off. Immediately afterward, Lieutenant Harold Crane ordered the forensics team to fully seal off the area around 48 Maple Street. Under the glare of patrol car floodlights, yellow tape was strung around the white fence, enclosing the front yard, gate, lawn, and the gravel section of road where tire tracks had been found. Residents were asked to leave the area. No one was allowed past the temporary boundary until evidence collection was complete. Crane directed two officers to photograph the scene from all four angles: gate, yard, porch, and curb. Each 35 mm frame was numbered with time and angle noted. He walked along the fence, the light cut diagonally across the damp soil where the small footprints were still clearly visible. When he bent down, he spotted a pink ribbon tangled in the grass, wet with dew and dirt. Crane picked it up, placed it in a sealed evidence bag, and labeled it Evidence #1. Nearby, a pale blue piece of chalk lay between two half-finished circles Ella had been drawing. He used tweezers to lift it into a second bag labeled Evidence #2. At the edge of the yard, near the street, the tire tracks were clearer under the floodlights. The soil was damp, but not deeply impressed. The car had stopped briefly and then driven off. Crane had an officer measure the track width. It was a mid-size vehicle with wider rear tires, most likely a four-door family car. A technician scraped soil from the tread marks into a glass vial labeled "Soil from suspected tire track, direction toward main road." The whole street was dead silent, except for the wind and the steady click of camera shutters. An officer read aloud while writing the log. 1942, scene fully secured. Evidence #1, pink ribbon. Evidence #2, blue chalk. Evidence #3, soil sample from suspected tire track. Crane stood on the porch, looking through the window. The living room was still lit, the wall clock nearing 8, the second hand ticking steadily. He stepped back out, double-checked every sealed bag to ensure proper numbering and chain of custody, then handed them to the forensics team. When the backup unit from headquarters arrived, they took over the scene and began transmitting photos back to the station. Across the street, neighbors still stood quietly. The floodlights reflected off weary faces half hidden in the night mist. Crane closed his notebook, walked slowly to the middle of the yard, and took one last look around before leaving his post. The place where Ella had vanished was now just a taped-off zone, stark and lonely in the cold night, every small piece of evidence carefully sealed, like the first fragments of a story with no ending yet. Once the cordon and evidence collection were finished, Lieutenant Harold Crane shifted focus to taking statements from neighboring homes. Maple Street had 12 attached houses. Most residents had known each other for years, so verification was relatively straightforward. Crane and Officer Baker went door to door, starting left of the Brooks house. At number 46, 62-year-old Susan Palmer, who lived alone, said that early in the afternoon, while watering plants in her yard, she saw a light blue Ford Fairlane stop briefly in front of the neighbor's house. She described the driver as an older woman with silver hair, wearing large dark sunglasses and a light-colored coat. The engine stayed running for about 30 seconds before the car drove off toward North Dunn Avenue. When Crane asked if she saw anyone get out or get in, Palmer shook her head and said she briefly glimpsed a small figure on the passenger side, possibly a child, but she wasn't sure. The answer made him add a question mark in the margin of his notebook. At number 44, homeowner Robert Gaines, a postal worker, said he hadn't been home that afternoon, but his wife mentioned seeing a light-colored car driving slowly past the street twice that day, once in the morning and once early afternoon. They assumed it belonged to an insurance salesman or someone lost, since the neighborhood was so quiet. At the far end of the block, Linda Hargrove, owner of the corner grocery, told the second officer that 3 days earlier she had seen a similar Ford Fairlane parked near the store for a short time and then leave without anyone getting out. When Crane cross-referenced the statements, he saw the witnesses' descriptions matched remarkably well. Four-door car, light blue, older paint, driven by an older silver-haired woman wearing large dark sunglasses, usually alone, and moving slowly around the area. He had a map drawn marking each house that saw the car and added arrows showing its path, turning from North Dunn Avenue onto Maple. Brief stop in front of the Brooks house, then heading back to the main road. By 9 p.m., Crane was back at the temporary command van, comparing information with local vehicle registration records. The system showed 8 1959, 1960 Ford Fairlanes, registered within a 10-mile radius, 4 owned by middle-aged women. He ordered the detective unit to check every plate and owner, and sent an internal bulletin to nearby checkpoints describing the suspect vehicle. Back at the scene, he summarized in his notebook: Witness 1, Palmer, confirmed brief stop, female driver, silver hair, dark glasses. Witness 2, Gaines, vehicle seen twice same day. Witness 3, Hargrove, vehicle seen several days prior, no passengers. Common description: light blue Ford Fairlane 5960, driven by middle-aged female, silver hair. On the last line he underlined in red, high probability suspect is local or former local resident. Out on the street, the fog was thickening, moisture blurring the metal mailboxes along the sidewalk. Crane closed his notebook and stared down the empty road, where now only yellow streetlights glowed through the trees, and the search team's radio chatter mixed with the wind, the scattered pieces of information beginning to form the faint outline of a strange woman. The entire neighborhood now realized had been circling them more than once. After finishing neighbor statements, Lieutenant Harold Crane returned to number 48 to interview the Brooks family. In the living room, the lights were still on, the smell of cold coffee in the air. Richard sat at the table, hands clasped tightly, face exhausted. Margaret was wrapped in a thin blanket, eyes red from crying, while Thomas sat huddled in the corner of the couch, staring at the floor. Crane set a tape recorder on the table and opened his notebook. He started with Richard, asking about his schedule that day. The father said he left home at 7 in the morning, worked a continuous shift at the power station on the south side of Bloomington until 5. He provided his time card, and a colleague confirmed by internal phone that he clocked out at 17:05. Crane noted, alibi provisionally confirmed. When asked about recent family issues, Richard said life was normal, no debts, no arguments. Ella was a good kid who did well in school and had never run away. Crane moved to Margaret. Her voice was hoarse, and answers came in fragments. She said she had taken Ella to school that morning. They ate lunch together, then she hung laundry, while Ella drew in the yard. She only looked away for a few minutes to fold clothes inside. When she came back, Ella was gone. She heard no noise, saw no stranger enter the yard. Crane asked about the woman in the car. She said she hadn't seen her, only that her son had mentioned it. He nodded, told her to rest, then turned to Thomas. The boy hesitated, hands clenched, voice small. He said while doing homework by the window, he heard a car moving slowly, looked out, and saw the light-colored Ford. The driver was a silver-haired woman, wearing dark sunglasses, who turned to look at Ella drawing. The car stopped for a few seconds, then continued. When he looked back a few minutes later, his sister was gone. Crane asked if he heard voices, a door, or any other sound. Thomas shook his head. He took detailed notes, then asked again about the car's description, color, and shape. The boy confirmed light blue, older style, like the family cars commonly seen in the neighborhood. Crane closed his notebook and looked at the 3 silent figures under the light. The neighbor's statements matched Thomas's account perfectly. The description of the silver-haired woman was consistent across reports. He stepped onto the porch, spoke briefly with Officer Baker on watch outside the car, confirmed Richard's alibi through the power company's internal phone system, and received word that the suspect vehicle had not yet been located within patrol range. Returning inside, Crane walked down the hallway and glanced into Ella's room. Small bed neatly made, stuffed bear placed just so, bedside lamp still on. He stood still for a few seconds, then came back to the living room, and clearly informed the family that police were classifying this as a missing child with suspected abduction. There were no signs of theft or internal conflict. Everything in the house was undisturbed, indicating the act was fast, deliberate, and carried out by someone who knew exactly when to strike. Crane's final entry in the file read, "Initial hypothesis. Abduction by unknown female subject, no prior connection to family, premeditated and surveilled in advance, targeted, rapid execution, no violence." Outside, the fog was growing thicker. Police floodlights cut pale beams through the windows, casting cold diagonal shadows on the walls. Crane closed his notebook and made the temporary decision: keep the scene secured overnight and expand the search radius to 3 miles. As he walked out the gate, Richard stood silently watching him leave, while inside Margaret collapsed into a chair and Thomas sat motionless, eyes fixed on the yard where just hours earlier his little sister's laughter had still rung out in the afternoon sun. That night, after completing the statements and gathering information from the Brooks family, Lieutenant Harold Crane ordered the launch of the largest search operation the Bloomington Police Department had mounted in years. His patrol team divided the area around Maple Street into 4 sectors, coordinating with the Monroe County Rescue Unit and local volunteers. Starting at 10 p.m., loudspeakers called on residents to help. Groups carrying flashlights and wearing reflective vests walked the streets and the small woods on the edge of town. A field command post was set up in the parking lot next to the Brooks house, a large map spread across a table with every searched area marked. Crane prioritized the Griffey Lake area, where a trail led through sparse woods before connecting to the main road. When the K-9 unit arrived, 4 dogs were given the scent from Ella's ribbon and jacket. At first they circled the yard, then headed north along the road, past 2 blocks of houses, toward the tree line. The scent trail was strong initially. The search team followed it, sweeping flashlights and noting every footprint and suspicious scrap of cloth. Near midnight, when they reached the red dirt trail beside Griffey Lake, the dogs began circling, lost the scent, and became confused. Crane signaled a halt and ordered a terrain check. The area was damp, the wind blowing the wrong way, likely wiping out the trail. He split the teams. One group continued along the lake shore. The other swept the woods. Ella's name echoed across the water, mixing with the sound of night insects. On the bank, flashlight beams danced over the black surface. An officer reported something odd floating at the lake's edge. The dive team was sent in, but they only retrieved a plastic bag that had drifted down from the market upstream. On the opposite shore, volunteers checked the reeds and found nothing but animal tracks. Around 3 in the morning, the temperature dropped sharply and thick fog reduced visibility. Crane called a temporary halt and marked the last point where the dogs had a scent. On the map, he drew a red line, trail #3, scent lost at 0.8 kilometers west side of Griffey Lake. Everything recovered that night, a wet candy wrapper, a few indistinct small shoe prints, was sealed for later analysis. At dawn, a fresh shift took over, expanding the search radius another mile around the lake and bringing in motorboats to check the shoreline. Results remained negative: no body, no evidence, no signs of movement. The county sheriff arrived on scene and asked Crane for progress. He only shook his head. In his notebook, he wrote briefly, "Wide area search, inconclusive results, scent lost at wood's edge, no new evidence." Crane closed the notebook and stood silently for a long time in front of the map. The dense red marks, proof of effort, exhausted. Outside, the last searcher's flashlights faded into the damp fog. He knew it was time to change direction. The next morning, as the search teams withdrew from the Griffey Lake area, Lieutenant Harold Crane returned to the field command post to focus on a new investigative lead, the light blue Ford Fairlane. Based on witness statements and Thomas's description, he requested the Indiana Vehicle Registry to provide a list of every matching vehicle within a 10-mile radius of Bloomington. By midday, the list arrived: 73 1959, 1960 Ford Fairlanes, still registered. Crane and officers Baker and Lowell created a classification chart, flagging those owned or regularly driven by women. From the data they selected 5 potential owners. The first was Dorothy Hale, 57, widow, living on 3rd Street, owner of a light blue 1960 Fairlane. Crane interviewed her personally. The car sat in her garage under a thick layer of dust, tires caked with old mud. Mrs. Hale confirmed she had not left the house on the day of the disappearance. Neighbors could verify, and she showed repair receipts from that morning. Alibi confirmed. The second owner, the McCarthys on Henderson Street, had a dark blue car that did not match the description and was used daily to take children to school. Crane removed them from the list. The third, Evelyn Cooper, 61, retired librarian, owned a 1959 Fairlane in silver blue and lived alone in Spencer, 8 miles from Bloomington. When the team arrived, the car was not in the garage. Mrs. Cooper said she had sold it for cash 2 weeks earlier to an unknown man. No paperwork. Crane logged the information and asked the registry to trace the VIN, but no transfer record was found. The vehicle was marked pending verification. The fourth owner, Patricia Vance, 53, a nurse with a clean driving record, had a darker blue car that did not match the light blue with silver tint description. She had been at the hospital all day on the 14th, time card confirmed. The final case was Henry Pruitt, 64, garage owner, who owned a light blue Fairlane, registered in his name, but had loaned it a month earlier to a relative named Doris Mayfield, 46, widow, formerly of Bloomington, recently moved away. Crane noted the details but had no current address to verify. He sent teletypes to neighboring counties, asking them to watch for a matching vehicle. Over the next 3 days, detectives checked gas stations, parking lots, and industrial areas. No trace of the suspect Fairlane. A southern checkpoint reported a light blue Fairlane seen heading west toward Illinois on the highway, plates obscured by dust, numbers unreadable. Highway patrol pursued but lost it. Crane logged the report. Strong possibility subject left the state in personal vehicle. Direction, southwest, Bloomington, Terre Haute, Illinois. He prepared a summary report for the state police office, requesting coordinated search for the suspect vehicle and a middle-aged female driver with silver hair wearing dark glasses. By day's end, the command van's walls were covered with charts, red notes dense around the Bloomington area. Crane stared at the scrawled lines. VINs, addresses, plate numbers, 73 vehicles checked. Only one question mark remained. Outside, dusk settled over the neighborhood, streetlights glowing along Maple Street, reflecting off the Brooks white fence. Crane closed his notebook, sensing the case expanding beyond the town limits. The scattered clues about the silver-haired woman and the light blue Fairlane, now only faint traces on the web of Midwestern highways. 2 days after the Ford Fairlane registry search, a new report arrived from the Southern Monroe County Patrol Unit. A witness had seen a similar car parked near the power company construction site on the outskirts of Bloomington the afternoon of the disappearance. Harold Crane immediately verified the employee list for that site and found a name that matched the vehicle description: Carl Denton, 34, powerline repairman, owner of a 1959 light blue Ford Fairlane. Checking Denton's record, Crane saw a prior arrest 3 years earlier for assault in a bar fight and an old complaint, never charged, for approaching minors. The information prompted an immediate order to bring Denton in for questioning. The interview took place in room 3 at 10 a.m. Denton appeared calm, wearing mud-stained work clothes, sun-tanned face, hoarse voice. Asked about October 14th, he said he had been working with the maintenance crew at the West Side substation, left the site at 4 p.m., stopped at a bar near the highway, then went home. Crane verified with the crew foreman, who confirmed Denton was present in the morning, but left early without explanation. No one knew where he went. Crane shifted to the car. Denton admitted owning the light blue Fairlane, parked in his garage on Henson Road. Officers were sent to check. The car matched, plates valid, but the right front tire had fresh mud with dried grass and leaves, similar to the type on Maple Street. The lab took soil and grass samples for comparison with the crime scene samples. While awaiting results, Crane continued questioning. Denton claimed he did not know the Brooks family, had never been on Maple Street, had no acquaintances there. Crane presented the witness statement, placing a Fairlane near the Brooks house. Denton frowned and insisted his car had been in the garage since the previous afternoon, keys in his jacket pocket. Crane noted inconsistencies and ordered fingerprint and interior examination. Technicians dusted the car, recovered a few hairs and a small stain on the passenger seat, and sent everything to the state lab. That same day the soil comparison came back, particle structure and moisture different, no match to the Brooks yard samples. 2 days later the hair analysis was negative, no DNA match to Ella's ribbon. DNA testing did not yet exist. Crane called Denton in one last time. He remained defiant, claimed false accusation, and threatened to sue if detained further. After reviewing all evidence and work logs, Crane had to release him for lack of grounds. As he left, Denton turned and said sarcastically, "I fix power lines, I don't steal kids." The door closed, leaving the interview room empty. Crane looked at the wallboard photo of the Ford Fairlane owner list, the words Carl Denton, excluded. The fragile progress he thought he had slipped away. In the office, reports were stacked high, every lab result stamped no match. The most promising lead was officially closed. That evening, Crane sat alone before the Bloomington map, staring at the red lines marking search routes and thinking about those first hours of the case. The gap between when Ella vanished and when anyone noticed. Every theory he built circled back to a blind spot where the silver-haired woman, seen by little Thomas, remained only a shadow on an empty street, and the blue car had become just one of dozens of old Fairlanes blending into the town's traffic, drifting beyond the reach of evidence. After the Carl Denton lead was officially closed, Lieutenant Harold Crane turned to the last remaining task, full forensic examination of all evidence collected from the Brooks scene. That same week, he packaged 3 main sample types, fabric fibers, soil, and tire impressions, and sent them to the Central Indiana State Laboratory in Indianapolis. Each bag was sealed with red wax and signed by Crane and 2 witnessing officers. The accompanying inventory listed Exhibit 1, pink ribbon, recovered from Brooks' yard. Exhibit 2, soil from tire. Exhibit 3, tire track impression from roadway. On October 23, 1961, everything was transported by official vehicle to the lab. The state lab then had only 3 technicians, using optical microscopes, ultraviolet lamps, and old-style photometrographs. The first report, returned after 10 days, stated the pink ribbon was woven from rayon nylon blend, common in children's decorations, no hand painting or dye, no recoverable skin cells or organic traces, suitable for future DNA testing. Such technology did not yet exist. The soil was compared with control samples from Maple Street, the Griffey Lake parking area, and the power site. Mineral composition was generally consistent with Bloomington area soil, nothing distinctive enough to pinpoint origin. The second report on the tire track showed a 152 mm width, herringbone tread pattern common to 1958, 1960 Fords, compatible with Fairlane, but also many other models of the era. Conclusion: insufficient parameters for unique vehicle identification. When the files came back, Crane read the 3 blurry typed pages over and over, every line ending with no conclusive match. He sat in his office late into the night, studying the chief technician's final comment. Due to current analytical limitations, exhibits lack identification value. Recommend cold storage for future comparison if new technology becomes available. Crane folded the file, added it to the thick stack on his desk, resealed the evidence bags, and sent them to the Monroe County Evidence Vault. In the log dated November 3, he wrote in even script, "Forensic report on Brooks residence scene evidence complete. Origin, undetermined. Insufficient scientific data to link evidence to suspect." In the margin he added a small note, "Retain indefinitely as evidence, possible future use with advanced techniques." When the file was placed in steel cabinet 221A, the dark storage room heard only the soft metallic click as the door closed. Outside, the season's first snow began to fall, covering the police parking lot in a thin white layer. Crane stood at the window, looking out at the street, thinking of the small ribbon now lying in a cold box a few floors away, the only remaining piece of the missing child. In his duty notebook, he wrote one final line before closing the case. State lab conclusion: insufficient data. Then he underlined it 3 times, the pen digging deep into the paper, as if sealing the end of a long chain of fruitless effort. Before the forensic ink was even dry, newspapers across the state began besieging the Bloomington Police Department. News of the 6-year-old's disappearance spread quickly from small local items to front-page stories in the big Indianapolis and Louisville papers. Photos of Ella Brooks in her white dress and shy smile were reprinted endlessly, appearing on statewide television under headlines like "Bloomington Girl Vanishes Without Trace." Every day, dozens of reporters set up cameras outside the station, interviewing residents and pressing for updates. Lieutenant Harold Crane, normally reserved, became the name mentioned in every broadcast. The same questions repeated: any new leads, any arrests, why no results, after nearly a month. Local papers ran opinion pieces, criticizing the investigation, claiming the department had reacted too slowly in the crucial first hours and lost the golden trail. Some reporters dug into the Brooks family's private life, publishing photos of the house and neighbor quotes, turning the case from a crime story into public spectacle. Margaret Brooks was followed by reporters on her way to teach. Richard had to take leave from work because of the pressure. Morning radio shows urged listeners to call in tips, offering cash rewards for useful information. Crane read those appeals at his desk, exhausted because each one brought dozens of useless calls from people claiming to have seen the girl at a bus station to ransom demands. The state ordered weekly progress reports from Bloomington PD. In a meeting, the mayor questioned Crane about the lack of concrete results, stressing that public confidence was eroding. The investigation room map was so covered with red search marks, there was no blank space left. Crane worked 16-hour days answering reports, handling anonymous letters, and chasing false tips. Many nights he stayed alone at the station, rereading evidence logs and statements, searching for any tiny discrepancy. The press never stopped highlighting the contrast between massive search effort and zero results. One Indianapolis paper ran a huge headline, "Bloomington Police Stumped by Phantom." In town, coffee shop and market conversations began with Ella's name and ended with suspicion. Was it really kidnapping, or was someone hiding something? Public pressure turned the case into a measure of local police competence. State units sent specialists to assist, but they found no additional evidence either. The forensic team confirmed again that no new samples had been collected since the first night. At a brief press conference in City Hall, Crane stood before dozens of cameras and said slowly that the investigation continued, but details could not be released. Afterward, he returned to his office, took Ella's photo down from the wall, and filed it away, not because he wanted to stop, but because the picture had become the symbol of a case the entire town now lived with in obsession. On his desk among open newspapers, bold headlines stretched across the pages, "The Ella Brooks Case. Darkness over Bloomington." Crane closed the paper, leaned back in his chair, and listened to the street noise drifting in like waves, relentless, unending, washing over every effort he and his team had made. What began as a family tragedy had become a public firestorm. Every eye watching, yet no one truly knowing what had happened on that quiet afternoon. 6 weeks after the final press conference, as media attention gradually shifted to other stories, the Bloomington Police Department still had no further leads on Ella Brooks. Every morning, Lieutenant Harold Crane arrived early, reopened the file, reviewed statements, studied crime scene photos, but all data led back to the same dead end. Search team reports confirmed every inch of Griffey Lake, North Dunn Avenue, and the abandoned warehouses south of town had been covered. No new discoveries. Most anonymous letters were hoaxes or recycled rumors. Every fresh tip was checked and crossed off, thickening the file without meaning. The state lab sent its final notice, no remaining samples worth analyzing. Crane sat at his desk, staring at the wall map covered with dozens of red dots. The only blank space left a white patch between two highways, an area already searched 3 times. He removed Ella's photo from its clip and set it on the desk, the edges already yellowing. In the 6th week internal briefing, the state police representative officially downgraded the case from active investigation to suspended case, meaning all proactive active searching and investigation ceased, leaving only a small team to monitor any new information. The order was signed that day and placed on Crane's desk. He read the bold line, Case #221. Missing child. Investigation suspended, then signed acknowledgement of the initial phase closure. That afternoon, administrative staff boxed all sealed evidence, ribbon, soil samples, photos, interview transcripts, into metal containers, labeled, and moved to basement storage. Crane personally placed the master file into a brown cardboard binder marked Case #221. Brooks, Ella, 1961, and handed it to the Monroe County Central Records Vault. When the vault door closed, the iron hinges creaked dryly, blending with the hum of fluorescent lights. He stood looking at the long rows of steel cabinets, hundreds of boxes, each an unfinished story. Outside, winter had arrived, snow blanketed the roofs along Maple Street, and the missing Ella Brooks, age 6 poster at the post office, was obscured by ice. The Brooks house stayed shuttered, silent, no children's voices, no smell of morning baking drifting from the kitchen. Late one evening, as Crane drove past the neighborhood, he saw a dim light from the upstairs window, where Margaret used to wait for her daughter. He turned off the radio, stopped the car for a few minutes, but did not get out. In his final report to the state, he wrote simply, "No new developments, no additional witnesses, no matching suspects. file archived pending new information. In his personal margin note, he added one small line: strong possibility subject left the state. Victim status unknown. When he turned over the evidence room keys, he left the building without a word to anyone. In the long hallway, the dull yellow lights shone on cold concrete, his footsteps echoing with each step. The Ella Brooks case officially ended there. No resolution, no suspect, only the papers numbered 221, lying silent among hundreds of old unsolved cases, as if the town, after all the turmoil, had quietly closed its own chapter in the stillness of the first winter since the child vanished. After the case was officially suspended, with no more police coming and going or yellow tape in front of the yard, the house at 48 Maple Street sank into silence. Richard Brooks rarely spoke. He still rose early out of old habit, but no longer went to work. He would sit in the garage for hours, staring at the neatly arranged tools without touching them. Whenever the door was opened, light fell across the family photograph on the wooden shelf, where Ella's face appeared between her parents and older brother, her smile like a cut between two worlds. One still alive, one frozen forever. Margaret stayed home and returned to teaching after her leave, but she was no longer the same. When students called her name, she often flinched. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence in class, eyes drifting toward the schoolyard. Thomas, 13 years old, became quieter than ever. He stopped playing with friends and never went out in the evenings. Every afternoon he sat on the front steps, looking down the empty street where the green Ford had once passed. In the first months of 1962, Richard began drinking heavily, at first just to sleep, later out of habit. Margaret tried to hold the family together by clinging to her job, but the distance between them grew. He came home less, she spoke less. They lived under the same familiar roof like strangers. One March morning, Richard packed a single small suitcase and a few changes of clothes. He told Margaret he needed to leave for a while to breathe, then walked out the door without looking back. His car headed straight toward Indianapolis, where a branch of the power company was hiring engineers. Richard never returned to Maple Street. Margaret stayed with Thomas, trying to maintain a steady routine for her son. The boy attended school regularly, but his teachers noticed his grades slipping. The school counselor said Thomas was haunted by survivor's guilt, convinced it was his fault for not stopping what happened. Margaret was advised to move him away from Bloomington, but she refused, saying, "Ayla is still here." Ayla's room was left untouched. Pink blanket on the bed, stuffed bear at the headboard, window opened every morning. Many nights Margaret sat in that room for hours, rereading the scribbled pencil entries in her daughter's diary. "I want to go to Griffey Lake with Thomas." She no longer cried, she only stared into the emptiness. When the school year ended, Margaret applied for indefinite leave, citing health reasons. Neighbors rarely saw her outside. People said that every weekend she walked to the post office to check for mail addressed to Ella, even though the mailbox had been empty for months. Thomas began keeping a journal at his mother's suggestion, writing down the recurring dreams. His little sister calling him from the lake's edge, gentle waves lapping late afternoon sunlight. Richard sent occasional letters, short notes saying he had moved again, that he was fine, and hoping mother and son were too. No apologies, no mention of Ella. A year later, Margaret cleaned the house, locked Ella's bedroom door, and put the key in a drawer. Thomas grew up in the quiet absence of voices, learning silence as a natural part of life. On winter evenings, when passing Maple Street, people still saw a faint yellow light in the second-floor window where the remaining two lived, waiting without saying so. Time erased nothing. It only made the loss the foundation of every day that followed. The Brooks family, once a symbol of stability in Bloomington, now existed like a house with its porch sealed shut, where those left behind learned to keep living inside the space left by the one who vanished. By the mid-1970s, Bloomington bore little resemblance to the small town once mentioned in old news reports. The dirt roads around Maple Street were paved, rows of new houses replaced the old wooden ones. New families moved in, mostly Indiana University faculty and graduate students, who had no clear memory of the little girl who disappeared. Number 48 still stood, but the white fence had been repainted, the porch roof retiled. Only longtime residents recognized it as the center of a case that once shook the town. Margaret Brooks still lived there with her grown son, who now worked at the university library, though few people knew them. Each morning she watered the garden, moving slowly, her frame shrunken with age. New neighborhood children asked their parents about the silver-haired woman in the old house. The usual answer was, she lost a daughter once, and the story ended there. Ella's disappearance gradually became a vague local legend, told to children as a warning, don't wander far when it's getting dark. In downtown coffee shops, someone occasionally mentioned the case half-jokingly, the girl was taken out of state. Someone saw the green car elsewhere, something strange about Griffey Lake. No one remembered exact dates. No one kept the old papers. The photos once posted at the post office had long been taken down, yellowed and creased, buried in drawers of forgotten files. Young officers newly hired at the police department sometimes noticed the line, Case #221, Missing Child, 1961, on the cold case list, but skipped over it, considering it worthless. Even Crane himself, now retired, was rarely mentioned. He lived quietly in the suburbs, far from the noise that had surrounded him 20 years earlier. Maple Street, once the boundary between ordinary life and one vanished afternoon, now lay under a veneer of calm. During festivals, children ran past the new houses, unaware that the corner where they laughed was once blocked by police barricades and searched by hundreds holding flashlights for a missing child. Margaret rarely left the house and seldom spoke to neighbors. At the library, Thomas sometimes overheard talk of other missing child cases, but never spoke up. He knew people had forgotten, and perhaps that was the only thing allowing his mother to live in peace. In 1976, when the town celebrated its bicentennial, someone suggested an exhibit of memorable Bloomington events. A black and white photo of Ella was submitted but rejected as not fitting the theme. No one knew what happened to the picture afterward. The town wore an air of tranquility, but beneath the fresh paint, old memories remained, unnamed. Those who had lived through the 60s sometimes exchanged glances when someone mentioned a lost child. They only nodded and said nothing more. 10 years later, the Ella Brooks case had become part of a collectively blurred past, a story each person remembered differently, pieced together into something no longer true, as if the town had chosen forgetting in order to keep existing. In 1983, spring arrived late in Bloomington. Weeks of fine rain left a thin layer of moss on the brick sidewalks of Maple Street. Number 48 sat quietly on the corner, now weathered porch roof sagging on one side, the once white fence faded to ivory. Margaret Brooks, 54, her health failing after years of heart trouble, almost never left the house. Thomas, 35, worked full-time at the university library, leaving in the morning and returning at night, still living with his mother yet each in their own world. She spoke little, spending most of her time in the second-floor chair by the window that overlooked the front yard and the street where Ella used to play. Beside the chair sat a small tin box holding letters and scattered notes she had written over 2 decades. At the end of April, Margaret suffered a massive heart attack in the night. Thomas rushed her to Monroe County Hospital, but she did not survive. In the quiet hospital room, while handling paperwork, he opened her purse and found an old envelope folded in half, inscribed in her slanted handwriting, "For Thomas. Open only when I'm gone." After the funeral, Thomas sat alone in the silent living room, the house filled only with the steady tick of the clock. He opened the envelope. Inside were 4 handwritten pages and a faded black and white photograph. The letter began briefly, "Son, I know you never stopped thinking about your sister. Neither did I. But there is something I kept inside too long. Now it's time you knew." She wrote that in the winter of 1962, a few months after Ella vanished, a silver-haired woman had reappeared in the neighborhood, driving a light green car identical to Thomas's description. One afternoon, Margaret saw her standing across the street, staring at their house, then driving away quietly. She asked neighbors. Someone said the woman's name was Doris Mayfield, who had rented a room nearby briefly before leaving town. Since the police were no longer investigating, Margaret considered reporting it, but feared it was only her imagination. In the letter she wrote, "It may have been a stranger, but that look, Thomas, I never forgot it. It was the look of someone keeping a secret." At the end she instructed, "If you ever have the chance, look into the name Doris Mayfield. Don't let them forget your sister." Beneath the last line she signed Mother, 1983. The enclosed photo, taken in 1961, showed the corner of the Brooks house with the little porch swing. In the background, faintly visible, a woman walking past the gate, silver hair bright in the sun. Thomas held the pages tightly. Memories from 22 years earlier, flooding back so vividly, he could almost hear tires crunching on gravel. He placed the letter and photo in a wooden box, locked it, and put it in his desk drawer. From then on, he was the only one living in the house. Every evening after the library, he lit the lamp in the window where his mother used to sit, looking down at the quiet street where new children now played as they once had. On the desk corner, the small wooden box sat motionless. Only he knew what was inside. Margaret's final letter, with the name Doris Mayfield, written slantwise in the middle of the page, became the sole remnant of a mother who always believed the truth had never been buried, only lying somewhere beyond the reach of those too weary to keep searching. In the summer of 1989, Bloomington had changed so much that almost no trace remained of the small town of 3 decades earlier. New subdivisions ringed the university. Only a few old houses on Maple Street still looked as they once did. On a stifling afternoon, 32-year-old reporter Frank Dalton walked into the Bloomington Police Department archives to research a series called Indiana's Forgotten Cases. Dalton, an investigative writer for the Herald-Times, was known for digging up files everyone else had abandoned. He was granted access to the 1960s closed storage room, hundreds of rusted cartons stacked high, thick with dust. While flipping through boxes of thefts and fires, he came across a small dark brown one with a faded label that still read Case #221. Brooks, Ella, 1961. He opened it. Old evidence bags, a few black and white photos, and a typed report with the signature H. Crane. Curiosity hooked him. He sat on the cement floor and read every page. The concise, meticulous reports, crime scene photos, and search maps surprised him. He had never heard of the case. The picture of a 6-year-old blonde girl clipped inside the file made him pause longest. That night he took copies home and started notes. He decided to find anyone still alive who had worked the investigation. After a week searching directories, he located retired Lieutenant Harold Crane, now 70, living in a northern suburb. When Dalton arrived, Crane answered the door, looking like a man long retired, lean, weathered. Old photos hung on his walls, investigation teams, award ceremonies, a yellowed certificate. When Dalton mentioned Case #221, Crane was silent for a long time, then invited him in. They sat in the small kitchen, sunlight slanting across the wooden table. Speaking slowly in a low voice, Crane said the Ella Brooks file was the one that haunted him most in his career. He remembered every detail: the white fence, the light green Fairlane, the mother collapsing on the steps, the silence of the older brother. When Dalton asked why the case was suspended, Crane answered only, "Not enough technology, not enough manpower, and no one still believed we could find her." He opened a drawer, took out a worn notebook he had kept since 1961, mostly matching the official file, but containing a few private notes, never submitted. Among them was a secondary address for someone named Doris Mayfield, marked with a question mark, and the words "unverified," left state. Dalton copied it down, without pressing further. As he left, Crane stood at the door and said quietly, "If you write about it, remember some cases don't die, they just sleep." Those words kept Dalton awake all night. For the next 2 weeks he tracked the Brooks family and visited the university library, where Thomas worked. The meeting was brief and quiet. Thomas, now 41, confirmed only that his mother had died in 1983 and did not wish to discuss the past. Dalton did not push. He only asked permission to photograph the old house on Maple Street. On August 8, 1989, his article appeared on the front page of the Herald Times under the headline, "The Girl Indiana Forgot." It recounted the case neutrally, included the black and white photo of Ella, quotes from Crane, and the 1961 social context. It ended with the open question, if this happened today, would we know the truth? The story spread quickly. Local radio stations read excerpts. Readers called the newsroom saying their parents had once mentioned the little girl. Some sent handwritten letters claiming they had lived near Maple Street or vaguely remembered a silver-haired woman in a green car. Dalton collected everything, organized it into a new inch-thick file, numbered every letter and note, sealed it in an envelope labeled Brooks, 1961. Follow-up. That evening he returned to Maple Street and stood in front of the dark house. August wind rattled the house number sign. Under the streetlight, he saw the old white fence, weathered, but still the same shape as in the old photos. A quiet street no one remembered anymore, yet somewhere the story of the 6-year-old girl had stepped out of dusty files into the words of a stranger, and once again made Bloomington whisper a name no one had spoken in nearly 30 years, Ella Brooks. 22 years after Frank Dalton's article, in the winter of 2011, a new unit at the Indiana State Police Headquarters in Indianapolis was formed to review unsolved 20th-century missing persons cases. The project, called the Cold Case Reassessment Program, and funded by the State Department of Justice, aimed to apply modern DNA technology to cases long suspended. Among more than 400 assigned files was a thin one labeled Case #221. Brooks, Ella, 1961. The lead investigator was 32-year-old Marie Collins, recently transferred from forensic analysis to the cold case team. Collins was known for meticulousness and detailed notes. When she received the file, the 1961 date immediately told her most evidence was likely degraded or lost. In the original report, the entry "pink ribbon recovered at scene" was underlined in red with the note "stored Monroe County," sealed. She decided to check it herself. 3 days later she drove to Bloomington. In the basement of the old county building, among hundreds of metal cartons, she located the box labeled Case #221. Brooks, Ella, 1961. Thick with dust. Opening the seal, she found the red waxed evidence bag intact, Harold Crane's signature still clear. Inside, wrapped in non-absorbent paper, was the pink ribbon fabric still brightly colored, only slightly faded at the edges. The rare sensation of touching evidence more than half a century old made her pause. 2 other samples, soil and a piece of chalk, were dried and useless, but the ribbon was remarkably well preserved for its era. Collins noted immediately, synthetic fabric, possible retained skin cell or epithelial DNA if processed correctly. She knew that since 2008, the state lab had upgraded extraction techniques capable of recovering DNA from minute samples. A plan formed: send the ribbon for modern DNA testing, low odds but enough to reopen a case everyone thought dead. That afternoon, she presented the idea to the cold case supervisor. Inspector Greg Shaw reviewed the file and said simply, "If the sample's intact, do it. That's why we're here." Collins completed the paperwork, resealed the ribbon in a cold storage box, and signed the new chain of custody form. Leaving the vault, she looked down the narrow fluorescent hallway at rows of faded metal cabinets and wondered, along with every young investigator, whether technology could rescue cases that people had once given up on. That night back at the office, she created an electronic file for the Brooks case, marking it reopened pending DNA analysis. On screen appeared the black and white photo of Ella, serious expression, eyes looking slightly away from the lens. Collins zoomed in, placed it beside the original description, and typed "Missing 1961, age 6. Bloomington, Indiana. Status: presumed abducted, not recovered." She sat motionless for a long time before turning off the light, feeling something unusual, not professional curiosity, but the cold determination of someone sensing, inside piles of old data, the faintest breath of life still waiting. In the next day's log, she wrote the case's new first line: pink ribbon evidence, seal intact, possible retained DNA. A small note in the corner, starting again where they stopped. The following week, investigator Marie Collins completed transfer of the pink ribbon to the Indiana State Forensic Lab for DNA testing. The item was double-sealed with full technical documentation and cold case authorization. On February 12, 2011, the sample was received and assigned ID. Specimen hash NCC 221. The lead technician was Dr. Leah McAdams, a specialist in recovering DNA from aged materials. Collins was present when they opened the seal. Under the microscope, the ribbon showed its woven structure clearly. Along one edge clung two microscopic hairs, likely from whoever last touched it. The sample underwent enzymatic digestion and modern PCR amplification, multiplying even the tiniest fragments. The process took nearly 2 weeks. Collins checked the lab's electronic log daily. On February 26, the results arrived. A clear female DNA profile, but no match in the National CODIS database. The report noted, no match to current missing persons or wanted subjects. Recommend indefinite open storage. Collins read every line, feeling both disappointment and intrigue. She knew the odds were low for a 1961 case, yet extracting a clean profile after 50 years was extraordinary. In her summary to Inspector Greg Shaw, she wrote, female biological sample recovered, no current database hits. Likely belongs to victim or female person of interest mentioned in original witnesses. She recommended uploading the profile to CODIS, flagging it for future automatic comparison, and enabling potential familial match monitoring in case a relative ever submitted DNA. After final paperwork, she archived the file electronically under 221A 2011. The screen displayed the cold status line, status unresolved, sample stored, awaiting future match. That night, she left the office late. The floor was dark, except for the glow of her monitor on her tired face. She opened the microscope image of the ribbon again, zooming until individual threads filled the screen. The faded pink looked like a memory bleaching away, yet under scientific eyes, it still carried the biological trace of a human being. In her personal case log, she added, negative result. However, sample retains identification potential as database grows. Keep sealed, cold storage. In the following days, she updated the state cold case system. Each file required the investigator's subjective assessment. She wrote concisely, likelihood of reopening within 5 years, moderate evidentiary value. High. While reviewing similar old cases, she noticed most had lost or degraded evidence. Very few still had intact samples like this one. Colleagues jokingly called the pink ribbon the thread stitching 2 centuries together. Collins didn't smile. She looked at the board where Brooks, Ella, missing 1961, now carried a yellow tag, DNA flagged, active hold. That night, she walked out into early March wind across the empty parking lot. Late snow fell in scattered flakes, melting on her coat. She gripped the thin case folder, almost weightless, yet inside was a piece of physical evidence that could still link past to present, in a way Harold Crane, and everyone before her, never had the chance to attempt. In August 2011, exactly 50 years after the day Ella Brooks vanished, the Herald Times republished reporter Frank Dalton's original series under a new headline, 50 Years Gone, The Bloomington Girl and the Unsolved Disappearance. Dalton, now in his mid-50s, was still freelancing for local papers and writing true crime history columns. The article opened with the same black and white photograph of Ella, accompanied by updated captions pulled from the Indiana State Police cold case file. Dalton recounted the entire timeline from the perspective of the original investigators, while emphasizing that modern DNA technology had been applied to the recovered evidence, yet no concrete leads had emerged. The story spread quickly, not only in Bloomington, but also picked up by major papers in Indianapolis and Chicago. Readers sent letters to the newsroom asking whether any of the little girl's relatives were still alive. A short interview with Thomas Brooks, now 61, appeared in the follow-up installment. Speaking slowly and carefully, he said he had never left Bloomington for long because it feels like she's still somewhere around here. Dalton visited his home at the end of the month, a small house on the edge of town where the same old photo of Ella still hung on the wall. On the table, Thomas had placed the envelope containing his mother's last letter, the original ink now faded, and told Dalton that he had recently received a request from the Indiana State Police asking relatives to provide DNA samples for future comparison. He agreed immediately. A few days later, investigator Marie Collins and a forensic technician came to the house to collect blood and hair samples. Thomas froze when Collins told him the pink ribbon from 1961 was still perfectly preserved in cold storage, and DNA had already been extracted from it. He signed the form with a slightly trembling hand, then asked, "Could that really help find my sister?" Collins only replied, "Sometimes science takes longer than a lifetime, but it doesn't forget." After the visit, she reported to Unit Supervisor Greg Shaw, and the Brooks file status was upgraded from suspended cold case to active DNA monitoring. From that point on, the case was officially placed on Indiana's statewide cold case list with quarterly reviews. The database noted, "Evidence DNA and family reference DNA stored and ready for future comparison." The information was released publicly in a Department of Justice bulletin, drawing attention from missing persons advocacy groups. A small private foundation in Chicago sent funding to cover ongoing storage costs. Media outlets began revisiting the case with a fresh angle. Modern technology may resurrect the memory of a 50-year-old mystery. A local television station invited Dalton and Collins for a joint interview. The image of two generations, one journalist who had covered the disappearance in real time, and one investigator now pursuing it with new tools, moved viewers deeply. During the broadcast, Dalton said, "We once failed because we lacked the tools. Now at least, the tools exist." After the program aired, hundreds of calls and messages flooded the station, many from people who claimed they once lived near Maple Street or had memories of Griffey Lake. Collins and her team spent 2 weeks sorting through the tips, but nothing proved useful. Still, the important thing was that the Ella Brooks case was no longer forgotten. On the Indiana Cold Case website, a new entry appeared, 1961. Ella Brooks, Bloomington, missing child, DNA pending. A small photo of the blonde little girl sat among hundreds of others, but with one special marker, a green dot beside it, indicating active monitoring. At the end of the year, Collins filed her summary report, "Case reactivated after 50 years. Evidence DNA and family reference samples securely stored at state facility. No matches detected to date, but scientific value and future comparison potential rated high." She printed the report, set it on her desk, and felt an odd relief. The Ella Brooks case had finally returned to its rightful place. No longer buried in the Bloomington basement, but listed in the statewide cold case registry, where every file, no matter how old, still had a chance to wait for one small signal from the modern age to begin again. In February 2012, nearly 6 months after the Ella Brooks file was reactivated in Indiana's cold case system, more than 1,000 miles southwest in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a 59-year-old woman named Anna Coyle walked into the genetics clinic at St. Vincent Hospital for a DNA test related to medical treatment. She worked part-time at the library, lived simply, and had never been curious about her origins because she believed she had been adopted as an infant. This time the test had nothing to do with ancestry. Her doctor ordered it to screen for hereditary heart disease. Anna's blood sample was entered into the national system like thousands of others. 3 weeks later, when the data was uploaded to the CODIS database for medical research purposes, an alert triggered. Her DNA sequence matched 99.9%. with a sample stored under case #221, Brooks, Ella, 1961, Bloomington, Indiana. An automatic report was sent to the state cold case unit, and simultaneously forwarded to the FBI as required whenever a missing person identification match occurs. Within 24 hours, the FBI field office in Albuquerque received the information and opened a verification file coded FBI File 12041 Brooks. Federal investigators immediately contacted the Indiana State Police to cross-check the data sources. When Marie Collins received the notification, she could hardly believe her eyes. She called the state lab to verify the DNA code. The technician confirmed the sequence was an exact match to both the 1961 pink ribbon sample and Thomas Brooks's 2011 reference sample. The system was not wrong. There was a woman in Santa Fe carrying Ella Brooks's DNA. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, Anna Coyle received a call from the National Testing Lab asking to verify her identity and explaining that her DNA matched a federal missing person record from decades earlier. At first, she thought it was a technical error. When asked whether she had ever lived in Indiana, Anna said no. She was born in Kansas and raised in Albuquerque. The coordinator gently said they simply needed to review her birth certificate records. That evening, Anna pulled out her old birth certificate from a drawer. The yellowed paper listed her adoptive parents, Doris and Robert Mayfield. In the handwritten place of birth field, written in blue ink and slightly slanted, it read Bloomington Inn. She had never noticed that detail before. Upon closer inspection, the inn looked rushed. The ink slightly different from the rest. An indescribable feeling washed over her. The next morning, 2 FBI agents knocked on her apartment door, showed their credentials, and said they needed to clarify certain biological results from her recent medical test. Anna let them in and tried to stay calm. They asked about her past, her childhood, the places she had lived. She explained that her earliest memory was of a small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, an adoptive mother who worked as a nurse, and an adoptive father who died when she was young. They showed her a copied black and white photograph of a roughly 6-year-old girl with blonde hair, smiling shyly, and asked if it looked familiar. Anna studied it for a long time, didn't recognize the face, but said that as a child, she used to dream about a white fence and a bicycle leaning in the grass. The agents took notes, thanked her, and left, saying they would be in touch once formal verification was complete. When the door closed, Anna sat down and stared at the old birth certificate. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure about her own name. At the FBI office in Albuquerque, the team compiled data from the lab, cross-checked it against Indiana's cold case file, and confirmed a perfect genetic match. Anna Coyle's DNA was compatible with both the ribbon evidence and Thomas Brooks's sample, with an error probability of less than 1 in a trillion. They immediately notified FBI headquarters in Washington and transferred the file to the unit handling long-term missing persons cases. The 12-page summary report concluded, living individual identified bearing DNA identical to 1961 missing person victim. Recommend initiating identity verification and personal history verification phase. Marie Collins received a copy through internal channels. She printed it out and stared at the final line, her hand trembling slightly. Matched subject, Anna Coyle, Santa Fe, New Mexico. After half a century, Ella Brooks's name appeared in a new file, not under missing, but under identity confirmed. 1 week after the FBI's first contact, Anna Coyle's life remained turned upside down by questions that had no answers yet. She kept receiving calls from investigators asking for more information about her adoptive parents, especially her mother, Doris Mayfield. When asked whether she still had any of Doris's papers or personal belongings, Anna said most of it remained in the old house south of Santa Fe, untouched since Doris died 2 years earlier. Doris had passed at 81 from heart failure, alone in the little suburban house. After the funeral, Anna had locked the door and left everything exactly as it was. One afternoon in March, she decided to return to the house to find whatever the FBI needed. The place smelled of old damp wood. The curtains were still drawn, dust thick on the tables. On the mantel sat the same framed photo of Doris in her nurse's uniform, kind face, deep-set eyes. Anna opened drawers and cabinets, stacking papers into piles, bills, nursing certificates, old photographs. In the bedroom vanity drawer she found a small rusty green tin box, labeled "Personal," for Anna, with the key still hanging on a hook beside the mirror. Inside were a few keepsakes, a child's silver bracelet, a faded photograph, and a thick envelope sealed with red wax bearing shaky handwriting, "For Anna, when you're ready." Her heart pounding, hands shaking, she broke the seal. The 4-page letter was in Doris's handwriting. She read line by line, barely able to breathe. "My dearest daughter," it began, "the time has come for you to know the truth. You were not born here, and you do not carry the Mayfield name. I found you when you were just a little child, lost and unclaimed. They told me your parents had died. I believed I was saving you from a life of loneliness, but I know what I did was wrong. Every document I have is false. I did it because I was afraid of losing you." At the very bottom, in smaller letters, Doris had added, "I kept the picture of you as a little girl in the box. Your real name is Ella." Tucked inside the envelope was a black and white photograph of a blonde little girl in a cardigan, with round buttons, smiling shyly in front of a white fence. On the back, written in blue ink, "Ella, 1961. Anna sank to the floor, hands trembling as she held the picture. Suddenly, every scattered childhood memory flooded back. The fence, the leaning bicycle, a woman's voice calling her by a different name she had always thought was only a dream. When she read the letter a second time, she noticed the handwriting in the sentence, "Your parents had died," was slightly different, scribbled, as if written in haste or to hide something. She understood that everything she knew about her life might be only the surface. That night, Anna did not sleep. She sat in the dark living room surrounded by familiar objects. Doris's favorite chair, the ticking wall clock, and the open letter on the table like evidence of a gentle crime. The next morning, she gathered everything. The letter, the photograph, the silver bracelet, into a large envelope and took it to the post office. On the front, she wrote the address of the FBI field office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the notes section, she wrote simply, "I believe these items relate to the case of a little girl named Ella Brooks, missing since 1961 in Bloomington, Indiana. I am Anna Coyle." After mailing it, she went home, sat waiting for the phone to ring, filled with a feeling that was both loss and relief. 3 days later, the FBI called to confirm receipt of the package and that it had been forwarded to the evidence lab. An agent thanked her for providing critical documents and said they would contact her to take a formal statement. When the call ended, Anna sat still for a long time while afternoon sunlight fell through the window onto the small photograph on the table. For the first time, she looked at the face in the picture and saw her own eyes reflected there, an undeniable resemblance. All the doubts, all the fragmented dreams of many years suddenly arranged themselves into one clear image. The child who disappeared in Indiana in 1961. The letter from her adoptive mother, with its line, "I only wanted a child of my own," felt both a confession and a farewell, leaving her in the empty space between love and truth. And it was also the reason she decided not to hide anymore, but to send everything to the people who could finally say what Doris had never dared to say while she was alive. 3 days after receiving the envelope containing the letter and photograph from Santa Fe, the FBI conducted a formal interview with Anna Coyle at the Albuquerque field office. The interview room was bright, pale gray walls, a wooden table in the center holding only a recorder and a file folder. The session was handled by Supervisory Special Agent Laura Green and Analyst Special Agent David Heller. Anna arrived on time carrying a cloth bag containing Doris's letter and the photograph of the blonde little girl she now knew was herself. Green began by thanking her for her cooperation, then explained the purpose. They needed to compare whatever personal memories Anna still retained with the documented facts from the 1961 missing person case in order to establish identity officially. Heller started the recorder and asked gently, "Can you tell us your very earliest memory?" Anna looked at her hands, spoke slowly, and described sitting on a wooden floor in front of a white fence, the smell of freshly cut grass, and the sound of a bicycle bell. Green glanced quickly at Heller, signaling him to note it. The original Bloomington scene report explicitly mentioned a white wooden fence in the Brooks yard and a small red bicycle inside it. Anna continued, "There was a gray cat named Whiskers that used to sleep on the porch steps." Heller flipped through the old file to Margaret Brooks's 1961 statement. Line 3 read, "Ella's cat Whiskers stayed at the house and never left the yard." Both agents exchanged a look but said nothing. Their expressions had clearly changed. Anna went on, "There was a big tree behind the house with thick foliage, cicadas in summer, and a young woman who always tied her hair back while cooking and called her Ellie." Green asked, "What did that woman look like?" Anna replied, "Brown hair, taller than I remember now, soft voice, Midwestern." Heller underlined the description. It matched Margaret Brooks's physical description in the personnel file, 5'7", dark brown hair, distinctive Indiana accent. When asked about any sounds or smells that reminded her of early childhood, Anna hesitated, then said, "I remember the smell of apple pie and a clock that chimed 8 times every evening." Among the items cataloged at the scene, police had noted oak wall clock in living room, stopped at 8 o'clock at time of disappearance. Combining the details, Green wrote in the record, "Subject's environmental memories match 1961 Bloomington scene description, 100%. Next they showed Anna photographs, reconstructed from the original file, showing the porch, fence, gate, and walkway of the Brooks house. Anna studied them for a long time, then pointed and said, "I remember this spot. I used to sit here drawing with chalk on the ground." The room fell silent for several seconds. Heller turned to another photograph, showing the remaining chalk marks on the brick patio, evidence preserved in Harold Crane's report. Anna lowered her head and stopped talking. Green asked softly, "Do you remember anything about that day, the day everything changed?" Anna closed her eyes and said her memories were fragmented, but one image remained: bright light, the sound of a car door closing, and a silver-haired woman leaning down to say something to her. She couldn't recall the face, only strong perfume and the feeling of someone taking her hand and leading her away. Green asked, "Were you scared?" Anna answered, "No. I thought she knew my mother." Heller wrote the statement verbatim, then looked at Thomas Brooks's original interview, in which the boy had said the silver-haired lady looked at my sister and smiled. When everything was cross-referenced, all the scattered pieces began fitting together perfectly. At the end of the session, Green requested a supplemental written statement and permission to take current facial photographs and fingerprints for comparison with archived records. Before leaving, she asked Anna whether she wanted to see Ella's original 1961 photograph one last time. Anna nodded. Her hand shook as she held the print of the child with big eyes and slightly wavy hair. She whispered, "I think I was this little girl, even if I don't remember every single moment." The agents collected the documents, told her they would be in touch soon. That afternoon, walking out of the building, Anna felt mentally blank, but also strangely unburdened. An indistinct part of her past had suddenly taken clear shape. Back in the office, Green and Heller compiled their report for Washington. Witness Anna Coyle's memories correspond at a high level of detail with documented facts of 1961 Brooks case, including physical features of residents, family pet, ambient sounds, scents, and specific actions of victim on day of disappearance. In the conclusion section, Green added by hand, "When someone remembers what the record already recorded, after half a century, that memory is no longer vague evidence, it is confirmation by time itself." 1 week after the final interview, when the recordings and statements had been transferred to the FBI's Central Data Center, the official DNA analysis results came back from the Indiana State Forensic Laboratory. The report was printed on a 4-paper with the bolded header, "Comparative DNA Analysis. Specimen #NCC 221AS, subject Anna Coyle." Below that was a detailed table of matching gene sequences. The final line read clearly, "Comparison result, 99.987% match with the DNA sample from relative Thomas Brooks." When Marie Collins read that number, she almost stopped breathing. She double-checked through the CODIS system. The data automatically displayed the highest match level in the comparison group, highlighted in green. Positive match. That meant the woman in Santa Fe, Anna Coyle, was Ella Brooks, the little girl who vanished in Bloomington in 1961. Collins immediately reported to her superiors and sent an official memo to the FBI requesting simultaneous notification to the Indiana State Office and the victim's surviving relatives. That same afternoon, in a small conference room at the Indiana State Police headquarters in Indianapolis, investigators, FBI representatives, and the lab director gathered. On the projector screen, a photo of 6-year-old Ella was placed side by side with a current photo of Anna. The facial features, the bridge of the nose, the small scar on the left chin, everything matched in a way that sent chills down the spine. The department director, Henry Latham, spoke briefly. 51 years later, we have confirmed that Ella Brooks is alive. No one said a word. There was only the sound of pens signing the minutes. An internal press release was drafted that same day and sent to state media with concise wording. The Indiana Cold Case Unit, in coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, has successfully verified the identity of Ella Brooks, missing since 1961 in Bloomington. The victim has been located alive and is currently residing in New Mexico. Once the release went out, Collins's phone rang nonstop. She was asked to prepare a summary report for the State Attorney General's office. In the description section she wrote, "This is the longest delayed identity reconfirmation case in state history." 51 years since the case was opened. In Bloomington, local police also received the official notification. A faxed copy sent to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office carried the header, Case #221, Status Update. Subject located, verified alive. Below it were the electronic signatures of Marie Collins and the FBI seal. The news spread quickly through law enforcement circles. That evening, Collins called Thomas Brooks, the only surviving family member. When she introduced herself, he was silent for a long time. Collins spoke slowly, explaining the DNA test results, summarizing the comparison process, and ending with, "Mr. Thomas, we have confirmed it. Your sister, Ella, is alive." On the other end of the line there was only ragged breathing, then silence. After a moment he asked, "Are you sure? There can't be any mistake." Collins replied, "No, sir. The error rate is less than 1 in a billion." After a few seconds of silence, his voice broke. "So my mother was right. She never believed the little girl was dead." The call lasted less than 10 minutes, but for Collins, it was one of those rare moments in the job when she felt her dry, technical work had truly touched a human life. She hung up, sat quietly in front of the screen, where the green words "match confirmed" still blinked. In Santa Fe, at the same time, 2 FBI agents visited Anna to deliver the official results. They presented the lab certification and explained that legal procedures would continue to restore her true identity. Anna sat motionless, clutching an old photograph tightly in both hands. When she heard the name Ella Brooks, she gave a small smile, a mixture of confusion and relief, and whispered, "So it turns out I did have a real name." The final report sent to Washington concluded, DNA comparison conclusively confirms the blood relationship between Anna Coyle and Thomas Brooks. The 1961 missing person, Ella Brooks, has been located and verified alive. The case file is officially moved to the post-verification phase. In her supplementary handwritten note, Collins added one short line at the end. "A case that ends in life, not death." That is what every cold case investigator waits for, even if it takes a lifetime. News of the DNA confirmation quickly reached Bloomington, where Thomas Brooks lived in a small house on the edge of town. On the morning of March 9, 2012, a team from the Indiana State Police and 2 FBI agents arrived to conduct the official meeting. Thomas had prepared the night before, after Marie Collins' call, but when the door opened, he still couldn't hide his tension. On the table lay the printed case file and photos of Anna Coyle placed next to pictures of Ella from 1961. Agent Laura Green, who had personally interviewed Anna, explained the entire testing and comparison process again and presented the lab certification, match 99.987%, direct blood relationship. Thomas said nothing for several minutes, just staring at the photo of the brown-haired woman in the report. Her eyes were gentle and strangely familiar. He placed his hand on the picture and said softly, "I recognize those eyes. My sister always looked like that when she wanted to ask something." The room fell silent. Marie Collins, present at the meeting, recorded the relative's initial reaction and asked him to sign consent for public disclosure of the identity. He took the pen, his hand trembling slightly, and wrote slowly. The blue ink bled a little on the paper. After signing, he leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath and asked, "Have they told her yet?" "Does my sister know?" Collins answered. "Yes, sir. She has been informed and has agreed to cooperate. We will arrange an in-person meeting once all procedures are complete." Thomas nodded and said nothing more. That afternoon, the Indiana State Police issued an official press release confirming that the 1961 missing person, Ella Brooks, had been located alive, and announcing the reopening of the investigation to identify the woman who had raised her for many years. The case was upgraded to a state-level investigation, coordinated between the Indiana Bureau of Investigation and the FBI. A 5-person task force was formed. Marie Collins was named lead investigator because she had overseen the entire technical process. Newspapers across the state quickly ran stories with headlines like "Miracle After 51 Years." "Bloomington Girl Found Alive in New Mexico." Local television interviewed residents around Maple Street. Older neighbors shared vague memories of the long-ago disappearance. In front of the former Brooks family home, now owned by someone else, people left flowers and small cards that read, "Welcome home, Ella." Meanwhile, in Indianapolis, the first meeting of the reinvestigation team was held in the cold case office. Collins presented the full timeline, discovery of the evidence, DNA testing, comparison results, and details gathered from Anna Coyle's interview. The next task was to identify the woman named Doris Mayfield, Anna's adoptive mother, and trace adoption records from the 1960s to determine legality. Lead Detective Greg Shaw emphasized, "We have an abduction, a child raised elsewhere, and a woman who may have committed kidnapping. We have to reconstruct the entire past." Collins nodded, knowing the road ahead was long. After the meeting, she contacted Thomas again to prepare photographic identity confirmation. 2 days later, at the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, he was invited to view a comparison set of enlarged facial photos of Ella in 1961 and Anna today. Thomas looked for a long time, then gently touched the small scar on the left chin of the woman in the photo, and said, "When she was 4, she fell off her bike. Dad carried her inside and bandaged it. That scar never went away." Everyone in the room fell silent. His words were the final confirmation no paperwork could match. The minutes were signed immediately. Thomas wrote his name under the line, "Relative confirms victim identification." The file was updated. Identity confirmation, verified by direct relative. When the session ended, he was asked to step into the hallway, where Collins handed him a copy of the official certificate. Ella Brooks, recovered individual, verified 2012. He held it, stared at the words for a long time, then said slowly, "She, Doris Mayfield, may have done wrong, but because of her my sister is alive." Collins said nothing, only noted the remark in her logbook. As he left the building, Thomas pulled over on the side of the road and looked into the distance. The March afternoon in Bloomington was softly sunny. Wind blew through the old maple trees in front of the police station. He folded the paper, slipped it into his shirt pocket, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, his figure grew smaller on the quiet street, the last surviving member of the Brooks family, still alive to hear that what they had waited over half a century for had become reality. And that the case once closed was now reopened, no longer labeled "missing child," but bearing a new title, "reopened." Confirmed alive. On March 15, 2012, a public press conference was held at Indiana State Police headquarters in Indianapolis to announce the official results in the Ella Brooks case. The room was packed with reporters. Television cameras lit up brightly as Director Henry Latham stepped to the podium beneath the banner. Indiana State Police, Cold Case Division. He began solemnly, "After more than half a century, we confirm that Ella Brooks, who disappeared from Bloomington in 1961, is alive. Her identity has been verified through DNA comparison with a direct relative, with an error rate of less than 1 in a billion." In front of him, a large screen showed side-by-side images of the 6-year-old girl from the old photo and the woman now known as Anna Coyle. The entire room was silent. Latham continued, "Thanks to modern DNA technology and the cold case program, we have solved a 51-year missing person case. This is proof that justice, though delayed, can still be served." He then yielded the floor to investigator Marie Collins, who stood at the microphone with a thin folder in hand. She briefly outlined the technical process: recovery of DNA from the 1961 pink hair ribbon, matching results with a relative sample, and identity confirmation in New Mexico. She emphasized that the person known as Anna Coyle had fully cooperated and agreed to provide statements to authorities. When reporters asked whether criminal evidence existed, Collins answered cautiously, "The case has moved to the reinvestigation phase, focusing on verifying the identity of the woman who raised Ella for many years. We are reviewing all related personal records." The press erupted with follow-up questions about possible prosecution, but Collins remained restrained, stressing that the agency's goal was to uncover historical truth rather than rush to judgment. At the back of the room, FBI agent Laura Green confirmed that the federal unit would assist Indiana, especially in tracing adoption records and population movement from the 1960s. In the front row, Thomas Brooks sat quietly, his face serious, holding an old photo of his sister. When the conference paused for photos, a reporter approached and asked his feelings. He simply said, "There's no one left for me to tell this to, but I believe my mother can rest in peace now." That sentence was replayed on evening newscast and became the emblem of the entire case. In the final portion of the conference, Director Latham announced the formation of the Ella Brooks Reinvestigation Committee, comprising representatives from the state police, FBI, and the state attorney general's office. The committee's mandate was to fully review the file, locate any surviving witnesses, and determine who took Ella from Bloomington in 1961 and under what circumstances. All media questions about the woman named Doris Mayfield were declined, with only confirmation that her identity was under review. Outside the building, dozens of reporters continued filming. National outlets began running stories with headlines like, "The Ella Brooks Case. Child Found After Half a Century." Forensic experts on television called it one of the longest resolved cases in the U.S., confirmed by genetic evidence, marking a turning point for the field. That same day, the Indiana State Police issued an internal memo, Case #221. Ella Brooks, status changed to reinvestigation. Phase 1. Tasks: identify individual Doris Mayfield, investigate travel route from Indiana to New Mexico, 1961, 1963, and review adoption documents in Illinois. All county units were ordered to assist. That night, in the cold case office, Marie Collins tidied her desk alone. Thick case folders were lined up, the top one bearing the bold printed release, "Reinvestigation Authorized." She turned off the lights and looked through the window at the parking lot, where late snow blanketed the patrol cars. The Ella Brooks case had officially entered a new phase. No longer the story of a missing child, but the journey to reconstruct the truth about the person who took that little girl from Bloomington all those years ago. A truth that for half a century had existed only in the pages of file number 221. Following the press conference, the reinvestigation team began work the very next week. The first data they focused on was the name that appeared in Margaret Brooks's letter and in documents Anna Coyle had sent the FBI. Doris Mayfield. Old Bloomington resident records showed a woman named Doris L. Mayfield, born 1910 in Crawfordsville, widowed in 1958, who had lived at 52 Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the Brooks home. Marie Collins and Agent Laura Green reviewed archived records at the Monroe County office and found a lease in Mayfield's name, signed in 1960 for 1 year, expiring in November 1961, 1 month after Ella disappeared. Her occupation was listed as visiting nurse, Bloomington Community Hospital. Former colleagues described Doris as quiet, focused only on work, sometimes distant. A head nurse recalled that Doris quit suddenly after a long shift in October 1961 without notice. In hospital internal records, Collins discovered a medical note stating Doris had requested extended leave after losing her daughter to pneumonia in 1959. The girl, named Lydia, was 4 years old. The death certificate confirmed death at home with no criminal suspicion. From that point, Doris began experiencing psychological issues. A 1960 local doctor's diagnosis read, severe depression, feelings of loss, tendency toward obsession with images of children. Collins underlined the phrase, tendency toward obsession in red. At the team meeting she summarized, Doris Mayfield, widow, lost her child, nurse, lived near the Brooks family. Left Bloomington immediately after the disappearance. Behavior and circumstances fit the kidnapper profile. The room was silent. No one disagreed. They decided to expand tracking of Doris's movements after 1961. Illinois resident data showed a Doris Mayfield renting a small apartment in Springfield in January 1962, staying nearly a year before moving to New Mexico. An Illinois driver's license registration with a blurry photo confirmed it was the same person. Marie Collins created a timeline: Bloomington, Springfield, Illinois, Santa Fe, New Mexico. At each location the records carried the same social security number and similar signatures. She noticed that in administrative paperwork from 1963 onward, Doris declared a young daughter named Anna, born 1956 in Bloomington, NN. This matched the birth certificate Anna Coyle possessed, clear evidence that Doris had forged a new birth certificate for Ella. When reporters asked Collins about this detail, she only said, "We are verifying the administrative records." But inside the team, everyone understood this was a breakthrough. Green contacted the Springfield Hospital archives and learned Doris had worked part-time as a pediatric nurse, then left without notice. A personnel report noted, often overly sensitive to crying children, sometimes removed patients' children from the room without permission, though never caused harm. The deeper they dug, the clearer Doris's portrait became: a woman who lost her child, grieved, grew isolated, and gradually developed an obsession to reclaim the image of the daughter she lost. She moved frequently, avoided contact, and finally settled in New Mexico in 1963, living there until her death. Santa Fe medical records showed hospitalization in 1972 for anxiety disorder and long-term sedatives. The treating physician wrote, "Patient repeatedly speaks of a child given by God to replace the old loss. Absolute belief that she saved the child from danger." Collins printed that section, clipped it into the report, and added no further comment. At the end-of-day meeting she presented the interim conclusion: Doris Mayfield is the primary suspect in the Ella Brooks disappearance. Personal motive: loss of child, post-traumatic psychological disorder, high probability of kidnapping to fill an emotional void. No evidence of accomplices. Travel route: clearly established from Bloomington to Illinois to New Mexico, matching the location where Ella, now Anna, was found. On the meeting room whiteboard she wrote Doris L. Mayfield in large letters, circled it, and beside it added smaller text: motivation, maternal substitution syndrome. In the dim light of the room, those words became the focal point. The first time in over half a century, the name of the silver-haired woman from the 1961 statements appeared clearly. No longer a shadow in memory, but a real person with all her pain, delusion, and traces that had lasted more than half a lifetime. In April 2012, after evidence regarding Doris Mayfield was confirmed, the FBI, in coordination with the Indiana State Police and federal prosecutors, executed a search warrant on her former home on the outskirts of Santa Fe, where Anna Coyle had spent her childhood. The small wooden house at the end of a dirt road had been vacant for nearly 2 years since Doris's death. The forensics team was authorized to unlock the door and use infrared scanners to search for hidden traces. That morning, Marie Collins was present with the investigation team, personally supervising the search because it was the last remaining opportunity to clarify motive and circumstances. The house was preserved exactly as it had been: dark wooden floors, walls with a few landscape photos, the bedroom still holding the old iron bed. Technicians scanned the entire floor with magnetic sensors and detected a small metal object beneath the living room floorboards, about 1 meter from the north wall. They pried up the plank. Beneath was dry, cracked soil. After a few minutes of digging, a metal object appeared, a bread loaf-sized tin box, its lock rusted. Collins, wearing gloves, carefully lifted the box and placed it in an evidence bag. At the mobile lab, the lock was cut in the presence of forensics personnel and the prosecutor's representative. When the lid opened, inside was a bundle of old papers, photographs, and a few small items wrapped in cloth. On top was a black and white photo of Ella Brooks from her Bloomington days. On the back, in shaky handwriting, the little girl's name was Ella. Beneath it was a forged birth certificate for Anna Mayfield, born September 3, 1956. Bloomington, Indiana, with a faint old official stamp. The ink variations showed it had been filled in by hand. Below that was a thick envelope containing 4 handwritten pages in slanted, trembling script, clearly Doris Mayfield's. The first line read, "If anyone finds this, please understand, I did not do this out of malice." The long letter recounted the late 1950s after her daughter's death. "The house was too quiet. I couldn't bear the emptiness. Every time I saw a child walk by, I thought if Lydia were alive, she would be that age." Midway, the handwriting grew heavier. "That day I saw Ella playing alone in the yard. Her blonde hair in the sunlight reminded me of Lydia. I didn't intend to do anything foolish. I only wanted to talk. But when she looked at me and smiled, I couldn't turn back. I told her I would take her for candy. I thought I would bring her right back, but when I saw people panicking and searching, I got scared. I had already lost one child, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing another." At the end, Doris wrote, "I raised her as my own. She never knew the truth. If anyone reads this, please tell her I loved her more than my own life." The letter left the room silent. Collins stood motionless, staring at the final line. "I know they will call me a kidnapper, but in my heart, I was only a mother who wanted forgiveness." All documents were sealed and transferred to the central lab. Handwriting and ink analysis confirmed the letter's authenticity. Paper and ink age matched the early 1960s. The subsequent FBI summary report concluded, "No evidence of accomplices or violent criminal intent. Motive determined to be emotional substitution following psychological trauma. Solitary kidnapping stemming from the loss of a biological child." In the additional psychological evaluation section, the consulting expert wrote, "Doris Mayfield exhibited characteristics of maternal substitution syndrome, commonly seen in women suffering family bereavement trauma. The stable environment in which the victim was raised indicates no element of abuse." When Collins received the final report, she read the phrase "emotional motive" and felt both heaviness and relief. A classic half-century missing child case turned out to have no dark conspiracy, no criminal ring, only the story of a woman led too far by the ghost of loss. The Santa Fe house was sealed for a few days and then returned to Anna, who now knew the truth. Inside, Doris's old belongings remained untouched, as if she had only stepped out and might return any moment. In the report sent back to Indiana, Collins wrote, "Search of scene completed. Evidence recovered includes metal box, photograph of Ella Brooks, forged birth certificate, handwritten letter. Preliminary investigation conclusion, solitary kidnapping, Emotional motive, no evidence of violence or accomplices. Case closed with respect to identity confirmation and victim circumstances. Beneath her signature, she added one small handwritten line: "Sometimes the greatest tragedy does not come from crime, but from love in the wrong place." After the search results of the Santa Fe house were confirmed, and Doris Mayfield's letter was released internally to the investigation, the cold case team moved to the final phase of the reinvestigation, a comprehensive review of every administrative trace Doris had left during the early 1960s. The goal was to determine exactly how she had legalized raising Ella and whether anyone else had been involved. Marie Collins, along with Special Agent Laura Green, traveled to Springfield, Illinois, where Doris had lived briefly before moving to New Mexico. At the Sangamon County Civil Records Office, they located a thin file labeled Mayfield, Doris L., Adoption Inquiry, 1962. The file contained only 2 pages. An application for adoption counseling submitted to a private organization called the Midwestern Family Placement Agency, headquartered in Chicago, and a pre-printed response letter. In the application, Doris described herself as a widow and a nurse who wished to adopt a little girl under 6 years old, in good health, with light-colored hair. Beneath the signature line was a handwritten note: "Will come to the office in person in early March." According to the agency's records, Doris did visit an administrative staff member on March 4, 1962. But the file ended at the initial interview stage. There was no documentation showing that an adoption was ever completed. What stood out was a handwritten marginal note. Collins discovered in the agency's internal logbook. Mrs. Mayfield stated she had found a child she believed was sent to her by God, advised to report to authorities if no legal procedure yet. That line had later been crossed out in red ink with the notation "closed file." Collins photographed the entire file and sent the images to the Indiana lab for ink and dating analysis. Results showed the original writing and the red strike-through were from the same 1962 period. Most likely the agency itself closed the file after Doris never returned. The team concluded this was a critical link. Doris had initially tried to legitimize having a child through the agency, but when she realized the process required birth verification and formal legal steps, she abandoned it and created forged documents herself instead of continuing officially. Next, Collins requested a search of all Illinois state vital records from 1962, 1963 to verify birth certificates issued in Springfield. Among more than 3,000 records, only one showed handwriting that matched Doris's known samples, a birth certificate for Anna Mayfield, born in Bloomington, Indiana. In the upper left corner of the document were chemical erasure marks. Forensic examination revealed the erased portion had likely contained a different city name, overwritten in the same type of ink Doris used in her confession letter. This forgery matched physical evidence recovered from the metal box buried under the Santa Fe house floor, strengthening the theory that Doris acted alone to create a legal identity for Ella. The team also reviewed the staff roster of the Midwestern Family Placement Agency. The organization had dissolved in 1974, but some personnel files remained in Chicago. 2 former employees were located and still living. One, an 83-year-old woman in Wisconsin, was interviewed by video. She had a vague recollection of a silver-haired widow looking for a daughter, but could not recall the name. When shown a 1960 photograph of Doris Mayfield, she confirmed it looked very much like her. However, she was certain the agency never placed a child with that woman, and that if she later had a child, it must have been through her own means. The final report stated, "No evidence exists that any agency employee was involved in forging documents or had knowledge of the kidnapping." At the final summary meeting in Indianapolis, Collins presented all findings to the reinvestigation committee. Doris Mayfield actively attempted to legitimize raising Ella through an adoption agency, but halted the process when legal verification was required. She subsequently created a forged birth certificate on her own, without involvement from any third party. The administrative trail shows she attempted to live legally, but on the foundation of a personal deception. The state prosecutor's representative agreed there is no accomplice or covering organization. The kidnapping was carried out alone and concealed through a series of fabricated procedures Doris created to maintain the illusion of a normal family. As the meeting ended, Collins looked at the summary board where the words Case #221 Administrative Findings were circled. Contacted adoption agency, self-fabricated documentation, no accomplice. Those words marked the end of a half-century administrative investigation, the final evidence confirming that behind the disappearance that once shocked Bloomington there was no conspiracy. No accomplice, only a solitary woman trying to turn her grief into a distorted act of good and spending the rest of her life in the shadow of guilt and misplaced love. In May 2012, after the administrative investigation confirmed Doris Mayfield acted alone, the FBI scheduled a final statement session with Anna Coyle, who from that point forward was officially referred to in records by her true name, Ella Brooks. The interview took place in a secure room at the Santa Fe field office, attended only by Special Agent Laura Green, Detective Marie Collins, and a legal officer. The purpose was to record Ella's complete childhood memories in order to establish a full picture of the years she lived with Doris. When the recorder started, Collins gently asked, "Are you ready to tell everything from the beginning, the way you remember it?" Ella nodded, her voice slow but clear. She said her earliest memory was a small house that smelled of pine, windows facing the desert, and a silver-haired woman who always called her Anna. "She told me I was the gift God sent after her daughter died," Ella recounted. "I didn't understand what that meant when I was little, but I knew she truly loved me." When asked what she knew about her biological parents, Ella said Doris taught her they had died in a car accident in Indiana. "I asked why there were no pictures," she continued. "She just said everything burned in the house fire, and I shouldn't dwell on sad things." In those early years, Ella lived like a normal child, but in complete isolation. Doris did not allow preschool, saying schools were full of germs and bad people. Instead, she taught reading, medical texts, and the Bible herself. She was very strict, but she never hit me. Every night she read to me and said the world out there was dangerous and I was only safe with her. Ella remembered their first winters in New Mexico, when Doris took her shopping but always avoided talking to others. If anyone asked, Doris introduced her as her biological daughter born in Bloomington, and people never suspected because both had light hair and fair skin. Neighbor statements from that era, previously reviewed by Collins, noted Doris kept to herself, only went out when necessary. There was no telephone in the house. Doris wrote letters by hand when contact was needed, and always mailed them far from the neighborhood. "I knew nothing about Bloomington," she said, "but sometimes when I slept, I dreamed of a white fence and heard someone calling a different name." Ella, when I told her, she said it was just a dream. From the time she was 8, Doris began calling her mommy's good girl and emphasized that they only had each other. She forbade me from talking to strangers, even neighbors. She said people would laugh if they knew I was adopted. When asked about her feelings, Ella paused for a long time, then said quietly, "I don't hate her. I know she did wrong, but back then I only saw that she was terrified. Some nights I woke up and found her sitting by the bed, holding my hand and crying." There were no signs of physical or emotional abuse in her account, only absolute isolation. Doris taught her to cook, sew, clean, and they prayed every evening in front of a photograph of the deceased daughter she called Lydia. "She told me to pray for Lydia's soul, and I thought she was my sister," Ella recalled. Collins asked, "Did you ever see any strange papers or objects in the house?" Ella nodded and said that around age 10, she accidentally saw a different birth certificate in a drawer with a different name. But Doris snatched it away and said it was a mistake. "After that, I never asked again. I was afraid of making her sad." As a teenager, Doris allowed correspondence courses for school. All paperwork was in the name Anna Mayfield. No one questioned it. Homeschooling was common then. I lived that way until I left Santa Fe for community college. By then she was frail, but she still warned me, "Never look back at the past. It will only hurt you." I obeyed, Collins listened in silence, taking notes on every detail. When asked about their final relationship, Ella's voice dropped. In her last years she became confused, sometimes called me Lydia, then apologized. I didn't fully understand until I read the letter she left. I think she knew the truth would come out and wanted my forgiveness first. Green asked, "Were you afraid when you learned you had been kidnapped?" Ella shook her head. "Afraid, yes, but not of her. I was afraid that if she hadn't done it, I might not be alive. I only wish she had chosen a different way." In closing, Collins asked if she remembered anything that made her believe Doris truly saw herself as her mother. Ella answered, "Every birthday she made apple pie, the kind she said my mother loved. Now I know it was the pie my real mother used to bake." Collins looked up and noticed Ella's voice trembling slightly. The interview ended after nearly 3 hours. When the recorder was turned off, Ella whispered, "I don't want her to be called a criminal anymore. I think she simply couldn't bear the loss." Green said nothing, only nodded. Everything was recorded in the transcript. Statement confirms Doris Mayfield changed the victim's name and maintained a closed environment with no elements of abuse. Victim was raised with affection, but completely isolated from society. In the final report, Collins added one short line. She does not remember being taken. She only remembers being kept through love, something that makes the line between crime and compassion harder to draw than in any other case. On June 12, 2012, after nearly 3 months of completing all legal procedures, the official reunion between Thomas Brooks and the sister missing for half a century took place at Bloomington Police Department headquarters. The reunion was kept private, attended only by FBI representatives, Detective Marie Collins, a legal officer and a psychologist. The second-floor conference room was simply prepared, softly lit, with windows cracked open overlooking the courtyard that once housed the 1961 Search Command Center. Thomas arrived first, wearing a dark blue shirt, holding an envelope containing old family photos. He stood by the window, sunlight falling on his deeply lined face. When the door opened, a brown-haired woman stepped in, Anna Coyle, or rather, Ella Brooks. She paused, eyes uncertain, hands tightly clutching her purse. Thomas turned, looked directly at her face, and for the first few seconds could not speak. Then he walked slowly toward her, stopping a few steps away. "Ella?" he asked, voice shaking. She nodded slightly, tears spilling over. He took one more step and hugged her, as if letting go would make everything vanish again. The room was silent, except for choked breathing. Collins looked down and wrote in the record, "Positive visual identification." Thomas Brooks recognized Sister Ella Brooks by appearance and immediate emotional response. When they separated, Thomas pulled an old photo from the envelope, a picture of the two siblings in front of the white fence in 1961. He placed it on the table next to a recent print of Ella. The two faces aligned almost perfectly. He said, "Mom and Dad are gone, but they never stopped believing you were alive. Mom wrote letters to you and kept them until she died." Ella took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it, and found a copy of the letter Margaret Brooks wrote in 1983. She read slowly, shoulders shaking. "She knew," Ella said. "She wrote the exact name of that woman, Doris Mayfield. Mom felt it." Thomas nodded, eyes red. Mom never stopped searching. They sat and talked for a long time. Ella told him about the years in New Mexico, the little house, and the woman who raised her with all the love she had, even though it was wrong. Thomas listened without interrupting. Finally he said, "She may have done wrong, but the important thing is, you're here." The words silenced everyone in the room. When the reunion ended, Marie Collins asked the siblings to sign the identity confirmation document on the form titled Indiana State Police, Recovered Missing Person. The first line read, "Victim name, Ella Brooks. Case hash 221. Date missing October 14, 1961. Date recovery confirmed June 12, 2012. Below were two signatures side by side. Thomas Brooks. Next of kin, Ella Brooks. Subject confirming identity. When the pen stopped, Collins stamped the page. The sound echoed softly in the quiet room. The document was immediately sent to the State Department of Justice for archiving. Outside, the Bloomington sky was unusually clear, sunlight glinting off the wet pavement after the previous night's rain, maple trees rustling in front of the police station. After signing, Thomas walked his sister outside to an old wooden bench the staff jokingly called Crane's Bench, placed in memory of Lieutenant Harold Crane, who led the original search. The siblings sat without speaking for several minutes. Ella looked around, her gaze stopping at the distant iron gate that had once been the departure point for search vehicles in 1961. "Do you think people still remember this?" she asked. Thomas gave a sad smile. "Not many, but the things that matter never disappear." He took a small silver bracelet from his pocket, a keepsake their mother had saved from when Ella was a baby, and handed it to her. "Mom wanted it to come back to you." Ella closed her hand around it, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never stopping the search." That afternoon, the Herald Times ran a short headline, "Ella Brooks Case Officially Closed. Bloomington's 1961 Missing Child Comes Home." Below was a photo of the siblings leaving the station, their smiles faint but real. In her office, Marie Collins completed the final report. Case #221 status changed to closed, recovered missing person. Victim confirmed alive and reunited with family. No further criminal activity exists following death of suspect. Recommendation: archive as special recovery case symbolizing the value of DNA technology in restoring historical justice. As she closed the thick file, Collins looked out the window and saw the two figures gradually disappearing down the sidewalk. She knew that for them there was nothing left to investigate. Only a stolen lifetime returned, however late, after 54 years. 3 days after the official reunion, Ella Brooks decided to stay in Bloomington a little longer before returning to New Mexico. On the morning of June 15, 2012, she and Thomas walked along Maple Street, where everything had begun more than half a century earlier. The town had changed almost completely, but some details remained. The brick front steps, the old maple trees, and the house numbered 48, the former Brooks family home. It now belonged to a young couple and was painted light gray instead of white. But the wooden fence around the yard was still there. When the owners learned the story, they invited the siblings inside. Ella stepped through the old gate, her hand trembling slightly as it touched the weathered wood. In the yard, the swing was gone, but a faint circular mark remained in the grass. "This spot," she said, "where I was playing that day." Thomas stood silently beside her. They walked through the rooms to the living room window, where their mother once stood watching the street while searching for her child. Afternoon light fell on the freshly painted walls, yet Ella could still see the ghostly image of the past. A young mother running frantically into the yard, her desperate cries mixing with car horns. She gently placed her hand on the wall and whispered, "I'm home, Mom." Before leaving, Ella asked if she could take a small fallen maple sprig from the porch and wrapped it in a handkerchief. That afternoon, the siblings drove to Lake Griffey. Once the center of the 1961 searches, the road around the lake had been widened, and the shore now had walking paths for visitors. A light breeze blew, sunlight dancing on the water. Thomas parked near the old trail, where Lieutenant Harold Crane had once set up a temporary command tent. They carried white flowers, some for their mother, the rest for the investigator who had pursued the case for years. Ella placed the flowers beside a large rock at the water's edge and bowed her head for a long time. "If not for them, I would never have been found," she said softly. Thomas replied, "And if not for you, they would never have known they were right." They sat on a wooden bench, facing the lake, birdsong mingling with the soft lapping of water. The breeze carried the scent of damp grass and young pine, a smell Ella recognized the moment she stepped out of the car. The scent of memories sealed away for over half a century. She opened her handkerchief, took out the maple sprig from the old house, and placed it beside the white flowers. "I want to leave it here," she said, "so the memories can rest." Thomas nodded. A moment later, he quietly pulled from his pocket a small piece of paper, a copy of Lieutenant Crane's final 1961 log note. Insufficient leads. Continue searching. He folded it and let it float onto the water, watching it dissolve in the ripples. As the sun dipped westward, golden light spread across the lake. The siblings stood and walked slowly back to the car. On the path, Ella looked back one last time, as if to etch the scene forever in her mind. That night, in the cold case office in Indianapolis, Marie Collins received final confirmation from the FBI. Case #221. Ella Brooks. Status recovered. No remaining criminal elements. Recommend state-level closure. She opened the case management system and changed the status to closed. Confirmed alive. A dialog box appeared. Are you sure you want to close this case? Collins stared at the screen for a long moment before clicking yes. Green text appeared. Case closed. The 15th of June 2012. She printed the final page, set it on her desk, and looked at the words, missing child, recovered. After 54 years, from the hallway came the sound of light rain, the same sound she had imagined whenever she reread the opening pages of the 1961 file. In Bloomington at that same moment, a soft rain was falling. Ella sat by her hotel window, watching droplets slide down the glass, holding the photo she had taken that morning of the white fence. She whispered to herself, everything has come back to where it began. Outside, the church bell struck 9, its tone carrying far into the quiet night. She knew that when morning came, she would leave Bloomington, but the stolen memories had been returned, no longer shadows in file #221, but a real person. Ella Brooks, born in Indiana, disappeared in 1961, found in 2012, and on the second floor of the police building, the final case folder was placed in the steel cabinet and sealed. The outside label reading simply, Case #221, closed by confirmation of life. An old case had ended, not in tragedy, but in a homecoming. When case file #221 was officially closed, the Ella Brooks case became the most discussed topic among investigators throughout 2012. The headline, "The Bloomington Child Returns," after 54 years, appeared across newspapers nationwide. But behind those lines, investigators were still left with a long list of unanswered questions. Doris Mayfield had passed away in 1991, buried in a small cemetery in Santa Fe, beneath a headstone engraved "Beloved Mother." By regulation, since the suspect was deceased and could not be prosecuted, the case was classified as criminal act confirmed, non-prosecutable. Nevertheless, the FBI continued to review the remaining administrative records related to the forged documents. A July 2012 report revealed that Doris may have received indirect assistance from an administrative employee in the state of Illinois in legitimizing the 1962 birth certificate. The certifying signature on the document showed distinct differences. It did not match Doris's handwriting, nor the known samples of the employee from that era. Illinois state citizenship records noted a man named John Albright, a clerk in the Vital Records Office, who had previously been internally investigated for irregular handling of birth records during the same period. However, he had died in 1978, leaving no statement or evidence behind. In the FBI's final summary, the last note simply read, "The possibility of assistance in forging documents cannot be ruled out, but the identity cannot be verified. No viable criminal basis remains." For lead investigator Marie Collins, that conclusion was an appropriate closure. What needed to be known had been clarified, and the rest belonged to history. She submitted a 172-page final report that stated, "The Ella Brooks case demonstrates the viability of long-term DNA recovery while serving as a textbook example of human factors in emotionally driven crime." The report was forwarded to the State Department of Justice and filed under Resolved Cold Case. That same month in Bloomington, Thomas Brooks visited the police chief to receive an official copy of the archived file. He took the folder home, placed it in his father's old wooden box, alongside family photographs and his mother's letter. From then on, it became a cherished family heirloom, a story that was both pain and proof of human resilience against time. In a short local television interview, he said, "I don't want anyone to call this a tragedy anymore. It's a story of survival, of a woman who found herself again." Thomas was no longer young, yet every month he still visited Forest Hill Cemetery, where Margaret and Richard Brooks rested, bringing a small bouquet and a recent photo of Ella. He would place the picture between their headstones and quietly say, "She's home, Mom." In Santa Fe, Ella Brooks, now publicly using her real name, lived quietly but more actively. After working with FBI psychologists, she began participating in the Bureau's Missing Persons Family Support Program as a psychological advisor. In sessions, she shared her story as a message that sometimes justice is not only about catching the guilty, it's about finding the ones who disappeared. She lived in a new house on the northern outskirts of Santa Fe, still keeping a few mementos of Doris Mayfield, the silver bracelet, a 1975 photo of the two of them at a park, and Doris's original letter. "I can't hate her," she once told the Santa Fe Journal. "I just think she got lost in her own grief. I'm here today because of that twisted love, so I choose forgiveness." Those words moved many people, yet also raised difficult questions. Where is the line between compassion and guilt? In the FBI's internal victim psychological assessment, it was noted, Ella Brooks exhibits remarkable internal reconciliation with no signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She has chosen to transform memory into motivation to help others. In the years that followed, Ella became a frequent guest speaker at criminology and DNA technology conferences. She spoke little about herself, only about a child who was found thanks to the persistence of people who believe in justice. Her case was added to the curriculum at the Indiana Criminal Justice Academy as a classic example of identity restoration in investigation. A childhood photo of 6-year-old Ella and a current picture of her are displayed side by side in the Bloomington Police Department's memorial room beneath the words, "The Missing and the Found." After completing the assignment, Marie Collins was awarded the Meritorious Service Award for her 4-year reinvestigation. At the ceremony, she said briefly, "Sometimes our job doesn't end with a conviction, but with a hug." That quote was reprinted in many outlets as a humane message of modern investigative work. At the Indiana State Archives, Case #221, Ella Brooks is preserved in a special steel box alongside other famous cases. Under moisture-proof glass, the original documents, the 1961 typed report, the photo with the pink ribbon, and the 2012 DNA printout are displayed as evidence of justice's endurance across 2 generations. A small plaque notes, "The longest-running case in the state resolved through DNA technology and interagency effort. 54 years between disappearance and identity recovery." Every year on October 14th, the Bloomington Police Department holds a memorial for those still missing. Ella is invited as an honorary speaker. In her first address, she said, "Not everyone who disappears is dead, and not everyone who is found comes back whole. But to live to tell the story is a privilege for both the seeker and the sought." The audience rose in applause, while Thomas, seated in the front row, simply smiled. He knew that after all those years, what remained was not pain, but continuity, a memory stitched back together with patience. In 2013, the Indiana Department of Justice released a report on 10 notable cold cases. Ella Brooks's was ranked first, described as a rare instance where justice does not end in charges, but in life. Criminology universities use it as research material on non-financial motives in emotional crimes. National television aired the documentary, The Missing and the Found, recounting the entire journey from the October afternoon in 1961 to the day Ella walked out of the police station in 2012. The film ends with a shot of Griffey Lake at dusk, 2 white flower bouquets drifting slowly on the water. The final frame reads, "Dedicated to all who never stop searching." In Bloomington, a new memorial plaque was erected near the old post office where missing person flyers for Ella Brooks once hung. Beneath it are the simple words, "Found, 2012." On autumn afternoons, with sunlight slanting through the maple trees, Thomas often sits there for hours watching people pass by. He told a young reporter, "I keep the file not to remember the pain, but to remind us that patience can sometimes be justice itself." Ella returns to Indiana once a year, lays flowers at the plaque, then returns to her life in Santa Fe. She knows the chapter is closed, but what matters more is the belief that some people, no matter how long it takes, never stop searching. In the Indiana State Archives, light shines on the metal plate marked 221. Below it, in small italic letters, "Recovered missing person, resolved after 54 years. That is how the authorities record it, but for those who live the story, the Ella Brooks case is not merely a closed file. It is proof of what Marie Collins wrote in her final report: "Time may erase traces, but it cannot erase the belief that someone somewhere is still waiting to be found." The story of Ella Brooks, the little girl who vanished in Bloomington in 1961 and was found after 54 years, is not just a solved case. It is a mirror reflecting American society today, a place where technology, law, and human compassion coexist in the search for truth. The perseverance of investigator Marie Collins, who recovered DNA from an old ribbon, reminds us that science is not only a tool of criminology, but also a thread connecting the past to justice. In today's technological age, when personal data, DNA, and artificial intelligence are used in investigations, Ella's story reminds Americans of the ethical responsibility in using technology, that every piece of evidence, no matter how small, carries human value. But deeper still, the story is a warning about psychological voids, like Doris Mayfield, a woman who lost her own child and let grief lead her astray. In today's America, where mental health crises are rising, understanding and supporting community mental health has never been more urgent. Ella, instead of carrying hatred, chose forgiveness and helping families of the missing, an act that reflects the core American values of belief in second chances and the power of healing. The lesson of the case lies not only in the triumph of DNA technology, but in perseverance, the capacity to forgive, and the will to reclaim what seemed forever lost. In a vast and ever-changing country like the United States, Ella Brooks's story reminds us that justice is not merely a verdict, it is a long journey of empathy and hope, something still needed every single day in our lives today. Thank you for joining us on the extraordinary journey of Ella Brooks, a story of faith, memory, and the power of reunion after more than half a century. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more true stories that touch the heart, where justice, humanity, and memory continue to be found.